How do you, how do you play this game, Mr. Morton?
Recently, two wealthy men testified before Congress with vastly different outcomes. One man was accused of lying, but acquitted following 2 jury trials for perjury. The other man did lie to Congress, but will never be charged. This video explains what happened.
Into the line.
In his 24-year Major League Baseball career, Roger Clemens struck out nearly 5,000 batters, won 2 World Series rings, and earned more than $165 million just in salary. In 2010, the Justice Department filed criminal perjury charges against Clemens for his testimony during Congress's steroids investigation.
Let me be clear, I have never taken steroids or HGH.
The government's case against Clemens hinged on 2 extremely weak witnesses. One was former Clemens trainer Brian McNamee, whose history of telling lies had been well documented.
We are stipulating for the record that Mr. McNamee lied to police officers when they investigated the matter. Mr. McNamee does not dispute that he lied.
The other witness was Andy Pettit, who'd pitched with Clemens on 2 different teams. Pettit's so-called evidence was his memory of a single conversation with Clemens a full decade earlier. The first trial ended almost instantly when the government violated a court order by playing a tape of Pettit's wife offering double hearsay statements to the jury. This infuriated Judge Reggie Walton, who blasted Justice Department lawyers and declared a mistrial. With egg all over its face, the government tried Clemens again in 2012. This time, Andy Pettit testified and got crucified on cross-examination, destroying the entire case against Clemens in just 4 words.
Back on the stand today, Pettit created significant doubts about his own testimony. Asked by Clemens' attorney if it would be fair to say that it was 50-50, that he might have misunderstood Clemens a dozen years ago, Pettit replied, "I'd say that's fair."
The perjury case against Clemens was doomed before it ever started. The government didn't have a shred of hard evidence, such as journal entries, showing that Clemens had actually used drugs back in 1999 or 2000. There was simply no way that a documented liar and a forgetful athlete could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Clemens had lied without some documentary evidence to support their claims. When the second jury fully acquitted Clemens, Attorney General Eric Holder tried to explain away the government's expensive but frivolous production of celebrity justice theater on grounds of principle.
Attorney General Eric Holder was asked if he believes retrying Clemens is a good use of limited Justice Department resources. Scott, he said it is, because testifying falsely before Congress is a serious charge.
This brings us to bailout recipient J.P. Morgan. In 2012, CEO Jamie Dimon testified before Congress about his bank's $6 billion loss in the competitive derivatives market.
Compete? Why, you can't even stand on your own feet by yourself.
When asked if J.P. Morgan would have failed without repeated bailouts, Dimon lost control of his emotions and forgot the carefully crafted script from his lawyers, saying only that the bank didn't seek TARP assistance. Without his script to prop him up, Jamie Dimon lied through his teeth.
We did not, at that point, need TARP. We were asked to because we were told, I think correctly so, that if the 9 banks there, and some may have needed it, take this TARP, we can get it to all these other banks and stop the system from going down.
Testifying on his feet, Dimon was out of his element and tried to bluster his way out of the question.
When you're not on that train, you look like a turtle out of its shell. Just funny. Poor cripple talking big so nobody will know how scared you are.
Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson's account differs sharply with Dimon's revisionist version. Paulson says he merely offered TARP money to the banks, which were free to come back later, albeit on tougher terms, if they chose to reject the TARP deal. While a former Secretary of the Treasury is a better witness than a confirmed liar, the conflicting Paulson-Dimon accounts present the kind of he-said, she-said evidence that doomed the Clemens prosecution. In Dimon's case, however, there's a ton of additional evidence to support a perjury prosecution. Specifically, the hard financial data that was recorded at the same time J.P. Morgan was getting bailout after bailout after bailout in 2008. There is no doubt at all, much less a reasonable doubt, about the accuracy of this evidence. J.P. Morgan received $25 billion in TARP funds on October 28, 2008. 4 weeks earlier, the bank had taken out loans of $62 billion in another bailout program, the asset-backed commercial paper money market mutual fund liquidity facility, one of the countless bailout brainchildren of the acronym-crazed Federal Reserve. By itself, this might seem to support Dimon's story about not needing TARP. After all, since J.P. Morgan had already received a $62 billion bailout, why would the bank accept a $25 billion bailout from the wildly unpopular TARP program unless it was forced to? The answer lies in what happened after TARP, in an episode that exposed Jamie Dimon's true need for massive government assistance. Just 2 weeks after J.P. Morgan's TARP bailout, it got a third bailout for $40 billion from the FDIC's Temporary Liquidity Guarantee Program. The $40 billion hole in Dimon's story is that each bank was free to opt out of the FDIC bailout if it didn't need the money, either in whole or in part. The FDIC kept a list of banks that opted out, and JP Morgan's name isn't there because the bank still needed $40 billion within days of getting $87 billion in 2 previous bailouts. Since we know that the bank needed larger bailout number 3 from the FDIC, it follows that J.P. Morgan needed smaller bailout number 2 even more, which at that point in time meant the U.S. Treasury's TARP bailout. This is why Dimon freely accepted Paulson's offer of $25 billion in TARP assistance. Dimon didn't take 1 cent of welfare he didn't need. At bottom, the acid test of hard data reveals who's telling the truth and who's lying, which means $6 billion man Jamie Dimon wouldn't have a leg to stand on in a perjury trial. This wasn't possible with Clemens. Not a single analysis of his pitching statistics supported the government's allegations, but the Justice Department tried Roger Clemens for perjury anyway. The bailout data, by contrast, showed that J.P. Morgan needed every handout it got, especially TARP, and that Jamie Dimon lied about it. The data also revealed that Dimon lied about borrowing from the Federal Reserve, and that he knew he was lying when he lied about this.
I could squash you like a wormy apple.
According to Dimon, J.P. Morgan borrowed from the Fed only at its request in order to make it easier for other banks.
We did not borrow from the Federal Reserve except when they asked us to. They said, please use these facilities. It makes it easier for others. We would all like it.
A far different account is contained in the Fed's term auction facility data. This was the first of countless bank bailouts, which actually began in December of 2007. For the first 5 months of TAF, J.P. Morgan didn't participate at all, while the other banks, which were supposedly reluctant to borrow from the Fed, took out over $500 billion in loans. In May of 2008, when J.P. Morgan finally did go to the TAF well, it borrowed a grand total of $4 billion. In light of the data, Dimon's lie about Fed borrowing is almost as pathetic as the roomful of U.S. senators who failed to catch it.
We did not borrow from the Federal Reserve except when they asked us to. They said, please use these facilities. It makes it easier for others. We would all like it.
J.P. Morgan's $4 billion loan was a drop in the TAF ocean that had no effect whatsoever on borrowing by other banks. Contrary to Dimon's testimony, moreover, demand by the other banks was so high that the Fed had to put a ceiling on how much it would lend out, and then had to jack up its own lending limit 3 separate times. According to the New York Fed, making it easier for banks to borrow was the sole purpose of the TAF program, which thus had no need for J.P. Morgan to borrow at all. also contrary to Dimon's testimony. Since Jamie Dimon is a board member of the New York Fed, he not only knew his testimony about the Fed's reliance on J.P. Morgan borrowing was false, but was being deceitful when he scapegoated the Fed as if it were some outside entity that he had no control over. Neither Congress nor the Justice Department will do anything about the rash of multi-billion-dollar lies Jamie Dimon fed to the Senate. The reason is simple and reveals the real difference between Jamie Dimon and Roger Clemens. When Roger Clemens testified, he was under oath, which Congress repeatedly used as a threat.
Now, Mr. Clemens, I'm reminding you that you are under oath.
When Jamie Dimon testified, the Senate said he would be under oath, like Roger Clemens, but proved its own word false when every member of the Banking Committee, starting with Chairman Tim Johnson, declined to swear in the witness. The entire hearing was therefore mere theater, which Mr. Dimon appears to have known only too well. Because he was never under oath, Jamie Dimon was free to give false testimony without fear of a perjury charge. The difference between Roger Clemens and Jamie Dimon isn't the money they make. It's what they get in return for their money that makes Dimon an elite and Clemens a multimillionaire serf. J.P. Morgan pays off banking committee members in both the Republican and Democratic branches of the unified Bankster Party. In return, they play charades with Jamie Dimon for 2 hours, which the media then pretends is a real hearing. J.P. Morgan pays Barack Obama enough money to get false advertising for Dimon aired on national TV talk shows.
J.P. Morgan is one of the best managed banks there is. Jamie Dimon, the head of it, is one of the smartest bankers we got.
This cesspool of bribery and graft is replacing black-letter law with a game rigged for liars and criminals. The new American divide is stark. If you think you're above the crowd and part of the elite, you're off by roughly $165 million. The real elite control our legal representatives, like a staff of butlers and a team of henchmen. This system of wielding power without decent restraint is a rerun straight from the history books. The last elites who treaded lawlessly got thrown off, and duty would seem to be calling again, whether the elites hear it or not.